middle path for those people who want to worship God.
You spoke about redemption. Like rejection society. So, henceforth, like rejecting like the laws of the social of what we're in. What we get to say about it.
Well, again, laws, when we look at the laws, for example, here in England, when we look at the body of laws that exist, realistically speaking, are all of these laws contrary to Islam? No. Probably about 80% of the laws are right in line with Islam. If you have Islamic State, they're going to be using similar laws. Because the laws either came from the Old Testament, the Ten Commandments, or they're laws that evolved out of what they call fitrah. A person naturally feels and understands this is wrong, this is right. So laws evolved in that fashion. Most of the laws, probably about 80% of them, are acceptable. There's some laws which are not acceptable. Laws which says you cannot marry your cousin. This is against Islam. Islam says you can marry your cousin. So as Muslims, you don't have to obey that law. You can marry your cousin. Right? So where these laws contradict Islamic law, you're not obliged to obey the law. But where the law is a reasonable law, don't cross on the red. Islamic society did that. I mean, why are you going to obey it over there in the country? You won't obey it here. I mean, we just cannot go into just total rejection kind of thing. Anything which is from this society, I mean, no. I mean, because this is the justification for criminality. If a brother wants to be a criminal, the guy wants to be a criminal, this is the justification. I've rejected the law. It's okay for me to break and enter and steal and to rip off and this is the law of the jungle, This is that attitude. But I mean, if a person is about, righteousness, then automatically he's going to feel that's wrong.
If the law is a such tyrannical necessity, for instance, pay for water, or some sort of unnecessary tax, or some sort of fine. Not a fine. Some sort of some sort of rate. Not the water rate, for instance. And if someone wasn't to pay that, would there be any Islamically? Would you be wrong to not pay the water rate? Allah has one of the bounties of Allah.
True. But is this bounty of Allah? I mean, I live in Saudi Arabia and I pay money for using water. Because that water is not coming into my tap by itself. I didn't dig a hole in the ground and the water is coming up and I'm tapping the water. If I was doing that, somebody wanted to charge me for that. It's theoretical. But now if somebody has set up a means of pulling this water out and cleaning it up and piping it and pumping it and, this costs money. This is things, this has a cost to it. So for the maintenance of that system, etc., they ask you to pay a fee. This is reasonable. It's not unreasonable. In my view, it is reasonable.
This thing about establishing, once it's established in Islamic State, and some of the lawyers, now, if you're going to say, for the law, this society, using this system, right? Say if I'm going to tell me all the law, would it be okay me to just go through this crucial event of this law, and then how then would that would it be able to apply the Islamic theory would be?
No, if a person studying law here would not be studying it from the point of view of applying it in an Islamic environment, because most of that law would not be applicable, right? And the techniques that you learn there will not be applicable because the Islamic legal system functions in a different way. One who studies law will be studying it from the point of view of protecting the Muslim community from the harm of that legal system. You see? Because we need, just like we need a doctor, we need doctors to be able to provide certain services for the Muslim community. I mean, when you have cases that arise, they have to go before court. Because they have to land disputes or, legal issues arise. Also, these things that have to be dealt with in the court system because this is the legal system under which you're living. To just say, well, I'm going to have nothing to do with it. You're going to just allow yourself to be oppressed, things to be taken away from you, you'll be destroyed. And in the end, you end up going to a Jew or to some, non-Muslim to go and defend yourself. And so there should be Muslims who are aware of the legal system, the loopholes, etc., how it can be manipulated to aid the Muslims and to protect them from the harm of that system. So the person learns it to that degree. They're learning it to gain their skills to protect the Muslim community, provide a service to the Muslim community. So such a person would not just practice the law and defend any criminal who comes to. No. Criminals, you can't defend a criminal. He defends a person whose rights have been taken by the system to help that person get his rights back. He provides, for example, he will have 1 day a week or 1 day a month or whatever, free legal service to the community, providing service, a direct service to that service, And as I said, his practice is one, he will not be the type of individual who will see, ending up in huge riches because he's not gone into the system for the dunya. He's gone into it for the pleasure of Allah. So it means that, he'll be moderate in terms of the type of income you earn for himself, etc. Because he'll be limited to just the areas which are acceptable Islamically.
You said that social work?
Social work also. Sure. Same thing. Because, what's happening right now, for example, here in Birmingham, I met one brother here who was doing social work, right? He studied it. And, he is going in because you have problems which exist in the Muslim community, especially amongst the immigrant Muslim community from Muslim countries, etc. They have many problems that are arising. Their children are, going into kufr here and there, and, one guy just killed his 2 daughters, killed himself, and just recently here, right? And this is happening in America, it's happening. There needs to be a system, of counseling and this type of thing to help people to deal with the problems that are arising, marital problems and things which occur which explode and lead into, major problems in the society, etc. There need to be people who have gained some kind of knowledge and skill in that system. Also, from the point of view that the social work system is functioning right now, where children, from Muslim families are being put into foster homes of Christians and this type of thing, it's very important that people are involved in that process who can help to direct them, those children, over into Muslim families. To utilize the benefits of that system for the benefit of the Muslim community. Because right now, the Muslim community is suffering severely in that field.
Seems to be there from the name. You said the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu said clip the nails, Had to clip the nails back in the days, you'd have scissors.
Well, scissors are not something which is new actually. They found scissors amongst the Egyptians, ancient Egyptians, right? So it's not something new per se. But actually the term used in Arabic is how did they clip the hair? It may have been, whatever technique they use is different from shaving, right? It's different from shaving. The clipping of the hair, and they use like a comb and then a knife, a sharp knife, and just cut off the extra hair that was above the comb, And for the clipping of the nails, the cutting really, say cutting the nail, It was making a clip in the sense that makes a clip, like a clipper. Right? They, of course, they didn't have that then, the clipper that we know of, right? But they had scissors, and you could use a knife. People will use a very sharp knife. You can cut your finger using a sharp knife. But it's not to say that because they only used a sharp knife in those days to cut the nails, it's haram now to buy a clipper and clip your nails off. But again, going to another extreme, right? Technology here we're not Islamically not obliged to give up technology because of the fact that it wasn't used by Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So whatever fulfills that purpose, right? We look at Allah asks us to do something. Whatever means that we use to do that, to end up with that same end result, as long as it's within halal, it is acceptable. And technology will improve different ways and means of doing this.
I was thinking of being interested if they could spend a couple of months in the country and then they come to realize how they must have lived in those days because a lot of these things they don't have. It's a practice. You know what I mean? How you get around that, you know? Because when I was a kid, I didn't know about Clippers, I didn't know about, you know what I mean, sisters, home, yes. I mean, but it's automatically sisters, you want to figure just something, you know what I mean? That's just someone for a barber or something, or a soul, or a woman that's soul. So I feel like not a common thing, and you just get by without having to see. You know, so going back to the days of them, there are ways of, you know, surviving. And it's probably better than what we have today now. You know, we take anything for granted and we can't do without it. You get in that frame of mind, you know. That's why Islam, I think they get in weak, you know, many people just sit back and they accept everything what's going on because they don't willing to make the effort to, I wouldn't say go back, but appreciate what they have. You know, they always looking for something simple, something to make them generally more aware or be noticed, if you know what I mean.
But the idea of simplicity, though, you see, it was noted that the Prophet Muhammad, whenever he was given the choice between two things, both of which were halal, he would take the easier one. Okay, this is the way of the Prophet. There's nothing wrong with us developing or using simple ways of fulfilling some of our needs. There's nothing wrong with that, really. You know, I mean, what we need is really to establish our Islam, you know, to apply it. Yes, to apply it. And I mean, we will use from the society what is useful and what is harmful and not, you know, we need that.
That's the question I thought is kind of different. Mortgage. Was that Islam?
Mortgage. Yes, and in my view, brother, you know, based on the clear prohibitions in the Quran, you know, and the Sunnah concerning dealings with interest, the mortgage system as we know it now, you see, there is a way within Islamic banking to do mortgages, which would be acceptable Islamically. But where there is no Islamic banking, for one to go into the existing system and then enter into an interest deal where you sign and pay interest, you know, this would be haram, unless your life or your limb is threatened. You see, if you have no means of putting a roof over your head, this is the only way which remains for you. You cannot rent a place, whatever. You know, this is all that is left for you. And this is not really the case. But if that circumstance arose, then you would be allowed to be an interest to that degree, just to the degree of providing for that particular need. If your workplace is so far away, it's the only job you have to feed your family, and you have to drive to get there. That's the only way to do it. And to drive, you must have car insurance. Then, given that circumstance, you have no other choice than to feed your family, etc. So you pay the insurance to that degree. But you don't say, because I have to pay this insurance for the car, I may as well, you know, get the mortgage on the house and, you know, to go to the bank and, you know, just the user is now to open doors to do everything else. No. Whatever is within this system, you know, we may be permitted to do some of the prohibited things within the system just to the degree that it is necessary to fulfill a basic need that we must have fulfilled.
So if you've already got the house and you've already had a mortgage, what do you do then? Do you sell the house?
Well, if it's possible to sell the house and get out of the mortgage, then that's best. If it's only a little bit remaining, you accept you came into Islam, for example, or you came to that realization, you know, then, you know, you may borrow money, whatever, from Muslims and pay off the thing and just finish the thing and carry on from there. You know, it depends on your situation. But if you have, you know, still, you know, you have 10 more years of paying of the interest and you know it's haram for you to just sit on that, it will be haram for yourself. Better for you to sell it off, get the money and, you know, try to reinvest it some other way to provide that need for yourself. And I know there has been fatwas given which make the allowance for mortgage in these circumstances, you know, it's a general allowance given because you're not in an Islamic country, you can. But you see, we have to be very careful of these things because, you see, when we have a clear prohibition by Allah and His Messenger, you know, and then we have the person coming to you giving you all these logical arguments, You see, you have to be very careful if you're going to leave what is clear and obvious to you, obviously prohibited, and go with what, suits your desires, from logic. You have to be very careful.
There's a problem with money in England. I mean, if you can't produce a bank, that means you should have in that.
No. No, but you see, if you put it in a checking account, you are not receiving interest. They don't give you interest. Savings accounts give you interest. But a checking account doesn't give you interest. The money is there, you can use checks to get your money out. It's just a means of holding your money for you. And then, of course, this is still, Islamically speaking, it is only acceptable because you have no other place to put your money. Because even putting your money in the bank is helping the bank. And Islamically speaking, you shouldn't be helping a credited system. However, we can say that is a minimum, that you can do because to leave your money in your house, people, they're breaking your home and, this will create a problem for you. You do that lesser evil, which is putting your money in the bank and not taking interest, as a means of, protecting your family in that sense.
I was trying to do some non-stop giving accounts with interest as well. But if you actually what you are, you want to take the also in account.
Some checking accounts also with interest.
So you have to be specific when you go to feed them, exactly what you want. If you go to a small fee for handling and the account that you want. But on the other one, if you have so much money, you will just try to interest on it, you don't want that. And what you're saying, another way, my work, they pay directly to a banking account, so there's no interest going on it, if you go to smart, you have to pay for handling your money, but, okay. From that, you don't have that much money in the earning, I don't think people don't give them a chance to work on it,
Well, of the classical tafsirs, we know there's Tabari has been part of the Surah Al-Baqarah has been translated into English, by one of the brothers, Muslim brothers, I think in Cambridge or Oxford, I don't know, I'm not sure which one, but it's already out in hardback, However, though Tafsir Tabari is the oldest tafsir available to us, and basically all of the later tafsirs ended up referring back to Tabari and benefiting from the work of Imam Tabari. At the same time, Imam Tabari's methodology for tafsir was such that the average person, if he tries to read this, he will be lost. He will be lost. Because Imam Tabari was a teacher. He taught students. And what he did was, when he took a particular verse, he would give you all of the different statements that people have to say about it. He would give you a whole range, from statements which were fabricated, to weak, to, based on his, from Jewish traditions, a whole range of statements. One after the other, some contradicting, directly contradictory. He gave you the whole range. And his students would then, in the course of discussion, pick out that which was really the best interpretation of this verse. Now, what I'm saying is that, as it exists even in Arabic, the average person, when he picks up Tafsir Tabari in Arabic, he's lost. He's lost. Can't handle it. When it was translated into English, the translator also conveyed the various opinions. So if you pick it up and try to read it, and to determine what is right and, what is the actual tafsir of the verse, you'll find, I'm sure it is available around here, maybe ICCI or whatever has a copy of it. You pick it and read it. And I'm not saying don't read it, you pick it up and read it. But I'm saying, this is what you can expect to find. It is not, practically speaking, though it is a classic, it is not a practical book to read for tafsir, if you want to read tafsir. There is, and of those available in English, We have the 30th part, which has been, from the typical stuff here, the Quran, Shirah, the Quran. This one has been around for some time. We have the tafsir of Maududi, translated into English. This is one of the few complete tafsirs which is available. They have limitations. I'm not saying that tafsir Maududi is it's most reliable. No, it's what is available. He's got a lot of information there. Unfortunately, Maududi himself, Maulana Maududi, was not a scholar of hadith. So he brought narrations as he came across them from the various books. So you will find that he will use for interpretations some narrations which are not authentic. This became particularly evident to me when I was I was trying to prepare a tafsir on Surah Yasin, because Surah Yasin is one of the favorite, surahs for the Muslim world, especially, for Muslim world in general, because Surah Yasin has become like the most important surah in the Quran. They read it for people who are dying, they read it for people when they're born, they read it, it's used all over the place like an amulet, special amulet from the Quran, Surah Yasin, right? People call themselves Yasin, So this surah, because it's been so abused, what I did was I went and I looked up the various hadiths which are related to the surah, which made claims for it. If you read it so many times, all your sins are gone, and you read it so this person's dying, he's going to paradise, and all kinds of, special merits for Surah Yasin. A vast majority of the material was, fabricated or extremely weak, So after I'd gone through and identified this thing, I just, out of curiosity, went to Maududi's tafsir to see, what he did with these traditions. Did he use them or what? So when I went to there, I opened up, to my surprise, I found that he was using these traditions, concerning reading it for those who are dying and this type of thing. And they were not authentic traditions that he brings at the beginning of his tafsir. So Yasin, he brings them, and the vast majority of them were not reliable. So it means that, though it is the only one which is available complete in terms of the whole Quran, one has to read it and still check back on the sources to the degree that they can. Material which is traced back to Bukhari and Muslim, obviously authentic, you can rely on. Other statements made, if there are other scholars available in the vicinity, in the locality, whatever, you try to ask and check about the reliability of the material.
There's another one available, two volume one by Muhammad Yusuf Simon,
Yeah, okay, this was supposed to have been a combination of the tafsirs of Ibn Kathir and Al-Qurtubi, I believe. They had taken portions out of this. It's incomplete. But this is something which is, because you'll find they will make references to hadith in Bukhari and Muslim, and trying to stay within that which are authentic. But and that is a fairly reliable text. And there are other pieces which have been done by other scholars, etc. But there is a major project going on right now in the United States. One brother, Egyptian scholar by the name of Ahmed Zaki, he has got a Quran project on where he and a group of people are in the process of trying to make a tafsir of the Quran based on the classics, Tabari and Qurtubi and Ibn Kathir and others. They're preparing one now. It's a major project going on, which is, full-time project. So hopefully in the not too distant future, something, will come out in that field, which is maybe more reliable than what is available today. To be called Muhammad. Oh, just finished it perfectly. You see, the name Muhammad, the name itself existed in the time of the Prophet Muhammad. I know commentators said that he was the only person by that name. But there are other narrations that indicate there were some other people who also had that name. And after his time, there is amongst the Sahaba who had the name Muhammad. and amongst the Tabi'een, and there have been Muslim scholars, through the centuries who have taken that name. So, and see, for it not to become permissible, we would have to actually have a statement of the Prophet Muhammad wherein he said that we should not take that name. What he did say was that one should not take his name and his kunya. That is, he was known as Muhammad, he was Abu Qasim. This was his kunya, right? The father of Al-Qasim, his son, he named Al-Qasim. So it's not allowable for us to take both his name and his kunya. But to take his kunya without his name, to take his name without his kunya, perfectly okay.
And what's the reading of talk about the spiritual aspect of Islam? It's very spiritual things and very touching and book on everything. And there's many things that it's got some good parts, some bad things. It's not right to run with some people can't take it in hobby. And understand the spiritual aspect of Islam. They don't know talking about feelings and very true people out there.
Well, see, the spiritual aspect of Islam is very important. Islam, because we as human beings are both spiritual and material, we cannot say that we put all our efforts into that which relates to our material world and we neglect the spiritual aspect, because in fact the spiritual aspect ultimately becomes even the greater and more important aspect. Our physical body goes away, the spirit lives on, right? So that which develops the spirit and helps the spirit to grow and to improve, etc., is very, very important. Whenever people give full consideration to that and neglect the material aspect, they deviate. Whenever they give full importance to the material aspect and neglect the spiritual, they deviate. But with whatever of Islam, for it to be correct, it must have both aspects to it. That this is that middle path where everything is combined. Islam it has both aspects to it. That's how we should approach our Islam. The issue that you mentioned in terms of Wahhabi, etc. Of course, ultimately what a person has to do is he has to seek Islam, based on the Quran and the Sunnah, which was based on revelation what came to us. What he finds close to it, or seems to be following it, that's what he goes by. What he finds does not seem to be following it, he avoids. People will put all kinds of labels on whatever they don't like, and pronounce to be deviant, they don't like it, So when we go and we hear a person, for example, refers to something as deviant or whatever, whether it's me or anybody, we have to look ultimately to see what is the basis of saying this thing is deviant? Right? Because what I consider deviant considers me deviant. Right? So you on the outside, you hear me refer to that person, that particular thought is deviant, that thought is referred to me as deviant. So now you have to judge for yourself. Your judgment shouldn't be because you like me, you like the way I talk. I seem like a real nice guy. Because the other people seem to be harsh or whatever, so you don't like them, so you're going to accept what I'm saying and not accept. No, that shouldn't be your criterion. Your criterion should be, what is the basis of what I'm saying? If it's based on Quran and Sunnah, if it seems to be linked to the basis of Islam, then this is what makes it acceptable to you. If what they're saying is not based on Quran, so our tradition, we always used to do it. We went to the graves and that's what our grandparents did, our great-grandparents did. Anybody who doesn't want to do it, the Wahhabi deviant, whatever. If you see that their arguments are just based on culture, there's no Quran to support it, no Sunnah to support it, then you reject it on that basis. And that's how we have to treat everything. Everybody is capable of error. No matter how hard a person may study, how much knowledge he may gather, whatever, he still is capable of making error. So you don't accept whatever anybody says just because they said so. Because he is so-and-so, is giving you this title or whatever. It's always, you have to go back and try to refer as much as possible to Quran and Sunnah, to the early scholars of Islam, and try to determine as best as you can what is correct, and avoid what is not correct. And because a person may make an error in a particular thing, again, you shouldn't necessarily reject that person because he said this position, I thought. It's always, you have to go back and try to refer to as much as possible to Quran and Sunnah, to the early scholars of Islam, and try to determine as best as you can what is correct, and avoid what is not correct. And because a person may make an error in a particular thing, again, you shouldn't necessarily reject that person because he said this position, I found not to be correct. So therefore, I'm going to reject that individual totally. No, it's a mistake. So because every scholar has made a mistake. For sure. The only person who made no mistakes in terms of conveying the message of Islam is Prophet Muhammad sallallahu. Everybody else after him made mistakes. So we are obliged, to follow those who seem to be following the path of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu and his companions and the early scholars of Islam. We try to follow that path and those who are closest to that path.
You about Arabic language. I wonder if you take it from Ahl al-Madinah at the time of the Salaf, is it the first three or at the time of Muhammad, or is there a difference?
When we're looking at the language, right, it may take in, various considerations. It may be something, because this is by narration, right? It may be something which was explained by a companion to students of the companions that this word means this word means that. It may be something as understood by the people in Medina, that this word came to have that meaning. This is the source where they got the explanation from. It may even be from later generations where they went to Bedouins. Because one of the scholars, the one who wrote Lisan al-Arab, for example, he was not an Arab himself. He was from Persia. The most classical Arabic dictionary. He was Persian. He was a slave, free slave. He'd been amongst Arabs. He learned Arabic, and he went when he was gathering the material for the dictionary. He went to the Bedouins. Oftentimes, he went to the Bedouins whose language had remained pure. So he sometimes took out of the poetry, pre-Islamic poetry or early Islamic poetry, as understood by the Bedouins, so on and so forth, to build up that body of the dictionary of the Arabic language, based on the language that was at the time when the Quran was revealed.
In context of the seven readings,
yeah, that will be included in there. The seven readings, or the seven dialects in which the Quran was revealed. This is included in that, because this is all part of narration, which the companions and the students narrated down to us of the Quran. This verse was read in this way, and it was also read in that way. This word was used sometimes, some revelation from the Prophet ﷺ, and another word may have been used in other recitations.
In the Quran, right, or in the Sunnah, they actually say that a Muslim can ask another Muslim for proof of what he says, or what he is.
So the thing is that when we're looking to see what is allowed and what is not allowed, right, we have to understand that the things which are forbidden are few. The things which are allowed are many. The things which are forbidden have been explained in detail. The details of them have been broken down for us, like the forbidden meats. Allah goes and lists every last one of them, broken down in detail. But when he talks about what is halal, he just says everything else. The foods are halal for you, just leave things wide open. So similarly, we have to be, when we're approaching determining what can we do, what we can't do as Muslims, we must assume if it's not an act of worship, if it's not an act of worship, it's day-to-day dealings in your life, so on and so, seeking knowledge, so on. It is not a direct act of worship. What you do is acceptable unless there is evidence to prohibit it. So I would say, rather than ask, is there a hadith wherein the Prophet ﷺ, or a Quranic verse wherein Allah says that we should ask proof for those who give us information? Rather than say it that way, I would say, is there any evidence from the Quran or the Sunnah which prohibits us from asking for proof? Because if there's none, then asking for proof is okay. That is the way I would take it. But in any case, just to go on from what you're saying, we have the example in the time of Abu Bakr and Umar radiallahu anhum, as the two caliphs of Islam, when they were in the process of coming to decisions, when they kept this, because the Sahaba in their time were concentrated in Medina, whenever an issue came up, and they would call the Sahaba together, and they would ask, had anybody heard anything from Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam on such and such an issue? Before they made any decision, they would ask first, is there anybody heard anything? Or some verse of the Quran will not remember. If somebody stood up and said, yes, I heard Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said so. Oftentimes, Umar would ask, is there anybody to support you? There's proof he's asking. Support. And then somebody says, yes, I also heard I was there, or I heard on another occasion, so. So he was asking, they did ask for proof. And Allah says in the Quran, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask those who know if you don't know. It is your duty to ask those who know if you don't know. And then he also says, that you should not speak without knowledge. وَلَا تَقْفُوا مَا لَيْسَ لَكَ بِهِ عِلْمٌ. That you should not, express or talk about those things in which you have no knowledge. So in other words, you should have proof for what you are saying. And furthermore, we also have the verse, especially this is in the case of, doubtful individuals, where, Allah also said in Surah Hujurat, that if, إِذَا جَاءَكُمْ فَاسِقٌ بِنَبَإٍ فَتَبَيَّنُوا. That if a person of questionable character, a deviant or a person who's not practicing Islam properly comes to you with information, you should seek clarity. Ask for proof. And we also know if, with pieces of slander, where if a person makes a statement concerning somebody's chastity and they don't have evidence, we know Allah has prescribed 80 lashes for them. So here's again proof for these kind of statements. So we know that there are many actual verses in the Quran where proof has been asked for, evidence has been sought, and I think there is sufficient in the Quran and the Sunnah to indicate that the seeking of proof may be compulsory in some cases, may be recommended in others, may be acceptable in others. It depends on the circumstance, how critical the issue is. Okay, I'll follow up that.
Sometimes I heard people make a mention of the Quran as a healing. Yeah. Is this a correct translation or a correct referral? And if not, could you explain it please? So that a lot of people say, the Quran is a healing. So I want to know that. Well, that's the Quran itself.
Allah refers to it as being shifa. Shifa, yarhamukallah. Shifa does mean a healing. And the companions of the Prophet Muhammad did use it in that fashion, in that they recited Quran over people who were sick. So it was understood that the recitation of Quran was also a means of dealing with sicknesses. The use of the Quran from the point of view of what we call like Tawheed, right? Where people now write it on a piece of paper and roll it up in a ball and hang it around your neck or around your waist and these kind of things. This kind of methodology, where it starts to resemble the amulets of the pagans, this is where we say, Islamically speaking, this would be not acceptable. But following the method, the way which was used by the companions of reciting the Quran over somebody who was sick, this would be acceptable. And we know when the Prophet ﷺ came under the influence of magic, that the last two surahs of the Quran, Falaq and Nas, were revealed, and that Ali was commanded by Prophet Muhammad to recite these verses over the Prophet Muhammad, and the magic spell was broken because of it. So the issue of using the Quran for recitation for sicknesses, etc., is perfectly valid. But as I said, what you have seen from the method used by the companions, that it was in recitation, not hanging your neck or stick it around your wall, or this approach was not from the way of the companions. Okay. Did you ask a question before? Did you ask one question previously? Okay, go ahead.
the science of tafsir, right, is this confined only to the Quran, or is the same sort of, is there a methodology to tafsir, for example, for hadith, you know, for the narrations and the traditions of the Prophet or something? Is there a science similar to the tafsir of the Quran for the hadith? In the example of a particular hadith is taken out of context or is interpreted?
No, yes, this will be similar. I mean, it may be not as easily defined as it has in the case of the Quran. You know, I can just give you 1, 2, 3, 4 steps, right? In the case of hadith, you know, you have other factors, because the fact that you have, you know, weak narrations of hadith. In the Quran, there's no weak narrations of Quran. In the Quran is Quran, what we have in our hand. So those factors don't come into play. There's other factors which come into play when you're dealing with hadith. But certain aspects of, you know, hadith explaining themselves, you know, the hadith within the context, you know, what the companions have to say, how did they apply this hadith. You know, this is all also, you know, these concepts will also be valid in the context of the hadith. Sure.
Now the issue of
oh wait, you asked one before, right? Little brother was not okay.
You know the Arabic in the Sahih Bukhari, yeah, is that the Arabic in which the way the script, the way that they would have like written down the narration, the hadith, is that the same Arabic
script?
Yeah.
I mean the handwriting style.
Yeah, same.
No, the written script of Arabic has changed in time. If you were to look at some of the early, just not even the hadith, go look at Quran. If you learn how to read Quran, if I were to show you a manuscript of the early Quran, you know, from the early 1st century, you could hardly understand it. I mean, there's no dots and dashes and, you know, these things are gone. You know, these were added later. So the Arabic script has evolved in time. The evolution, I mean, has been continuous. It didn't stop at one point. You know, we could say, you know, within the first probably about 300 years, the scripts continued to evolve. A number of different scripts evolved. You know, Kufic was very strong, had a high place, you know, until really Nasr, you know, and Sulus really became the most commonly used for writing the Quran, and in handwriting, you know, this became the most common. Kufic sort of was used only for, you know, for beautification and.
There is a letter of the Prophet Turkey that you can see copies of.
Yeah. Yeah, it's quite different from the handwritten script now.
You had the authority, like, well, to do this, to add more, I know it.
You see, Arabic evolves, you know, Arabic script or writing. The letters themselves, you know, a word, for example, say the word Muhammad is made up of Mim, Ha, Mim, Dal, okay? Now, how you write these letters, you know, does not affect the fact that those letters are there. This is what is not allowed. It's not allowed for us to remove any letters or add any letters. But how you write it, now this is perfectly natural for languages to develop for, because remember, things are now done by typing, you know, the type of instruments used for writing are varied now. We have, you know, new means, and so the written script will evolve to meet the needs of the evolving society.
He told in one of the footnotes of the translation, and what I've heard before was that what could you, which Quranic translation do you use that recommended as very short on TV and
see, the problem, you know, in my view is that a translation of the Quran without a commentary leaves you at a loss. To give, for example, a non-Muslim wants to read the Quran, has to face the Quran without a commentary, in many places he will be at a loss. He won't know what this is referring to. You know, So you need to give him something with a commentary. And probably, in spite of all the errors and everything that exists, Yusuf Ali's commentary is probably the most extensive, So, it's unfortunate that, it does have a lot of mistakes in it, but, for somebody, wanting to know about Islam, it's probably one of the best ones to take to read.
One fellowship of the faith.
So Pixels is without commentary. You need one or two little lines here and there, but virtually it's without commentary, it's just a translation,
the issue of reading Quran, without wudu. Because I've never seen teaching on the issue, and the ayat says, like I've read that Mutaharun refers to the angels.
This verse, though commonly used to be as proof, is not really in reference to human beings. It's not really in reference to human beings, but there are some other incidents which occurred in the time of Prophet Muhammad where he sent some companions out, in battle, and also told them, not to allow the Quran to be in the hands of the non-Muslims, Again, when we're dealing with a translation of the Quran, right, this is not considered Quran. So for dawah purposes, this doesn't really affect us. You can give a person a translation of the Quran, no problem. Even those who dispute about the Arabic aspect, can you give it to a non-Muslim or not, or this type of thing, you're outside of that. If you give him a translation of the Quran, it's generally accepted that wherever the words of other than the Quran are more than the Quran, then that text that you have is no longer considered to be Quran. And this is why Prophet Muhammad, for example, he sent letters to the leaders of Rome and Persia, which had Quranic verses in them. Knowing that these people are Catholics, are going to take it, likely to tear it up, stamp on it, or whatever. But for da'wah purposes, it was perfectly legitimate. Okay? So this is the area that said, where there is some difference of opinion. The general opinion is that a pure Arabic Quran should not be touched by a person without a state of wudu. And it would appear that the evidence supports that view. No, it's general. It's general. The Prophet ﷺ has said that what's below the ankle is in the hellfire. This is a general statement. It wasn't specific for prayer, so the idea of rolling up one's pants when one is making salah and then rolling it back down when you go, it's actually not in keeping with the spirit of the hadith at all. It's just this is just a mode of dress that Muslims, their pants, the garments nails do not hang below the ankle. Period.
It's basically what they're trying to position of it's that all you can say is prohibited among the from the act. And the other one says the other one is what they fear and throughout and about
well, from what I've understood, looking at these hadiths, the view that it is not allowed to drink standing would have to negate those hadiths which show that Prophet ﷺ did so, other companions did so, right? And the other view where it is allowable but disliked, this would seem to be, this would involve bringing both of the hadiths together. That the idea of not drinking standing or eating standing, this is a recommendation not to do so, and not really a clear prohibition, based on the action of the Prophet ﷺ, and the companions, in doing so. After we close up then, سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. We ask Allah to help us to understand this fundamental principle of Tawheed, to be able to apply the principle in our lives, not just to keep it as a academic or philosophical concept. And we ask Allah that He give us success in our efforts to do so in this life and success in the next life. Amen.